Hey guys, this is Chris from Jesus Machina, and okay, so I've started to watch some other people's videos on this, and I started to get more and more a little frustrated at the kind of knee-jerk reactionary process of kind of automatically taking the negative view of this. So I want to take a look at this very quickly. I'm not going to dilly daddle. I know a lot of people are probably watching the Roll for Combat video, and if you want to go for that one, go for that one. I am just going to look at it on my end, and if you have any comments, post them. We're going to look at it now. I was going to make sure here that we're not seeing any conflicting audio. Nope, looks like we're good. If there's any issues, please let me know. So this was first the, for over 20 years, thousands of creators helped, blah, blah, blah. Let's just go over this really quickly. If you want to use quintessentially D&D content from the SRD, such as Owlbears and Magic Missile, 1.2 will provide you a perpetual irrevocable license to do so. I like how they are using that very specific wording, perpetual irrevocable. That's the keywords that people are looking for. So they can't revoke this license that they're making. But as we'll find out, they can revoke your access to that license. So let's look at let's look a little further. We're giving these core D&D mechanics to the community through Creative Commons license, which means they are fully in your hands. This is a big move. Creative Commons version 4 is definitely an important document. Creative Commons is a nonprofit dedicated to sharing knowledge, and it developed a set of licenses to let creators do that. The Creative Commons license we picked lets us give everyone those core mechanics. I do believe the 4.0, which is what they're using, is the same one that I'm using for the 5.75 rules that we're kind of playing with. Let's talk about 1.2 and the important ways it's different from 1.0a. First, it allows us to address hateful content. Second, it only applies to published tabletop RPG content, including on VTTs. Third, this license specifically includes the word irrevocable, like they're saying it. Hey, Squarebag. Okay, so what's not in there? There's no royalty payment, no financial reporting, no license back, no registration, no distinct between commercial, non-commercial. Nothing will impact any content that you have already published under OGL 1.0a. That will be a license under 1.0a. Your stuff is your stuff. That's the big one. As long as that wording and that language is good, we're solid. We're safe going forward. There's a link at the end of the note where you can download a PDF of the proposed 1.2 along with the supporting documents for your review and feedback. Before you scroll down, let me give you more detail what's in there. Protecting D&D's inclusive play experience. I said before, content more closely associated with D&D, like classes, spells, monsters, is what falls under OGL. You'll see that 1.2 lets us act when offensive or hurtful content is published using the covered D&D stuff. We want an inclusive, safe play experience for everyone. This is deeply important to us, and OGL 1.0 didn't give us the ability to ensure that. Now, for those people who are aware, the GSL, one of the big aspects of the GSL, which at one point, let me go into to talk about just the GSL in detail. So this is looking like a lot that they're trying to do the GSL route again, which of course caused a lot of people to run. What the GSL didn't include, however, was the Creative Commons. Basically, the GSL said if you want to use these rules, you have to follow these certain guidelines. But one of the biggest things they added to the GSL was the capacity to pull your license if they didn't like what you were producing. Now, that being said, a lot of people have been asking what constitutes, like they're basically turning themselves and declaring themselves judge, jury, and executioner. And that's the honest God truth, that the executioner is to kill your license. What can constitute that? Is there an appeal? Can you ditch your product and revert to another license and republish it? And the answer, of course, that takes time and effort and money. So when we're looking at that license, now it should be noted, as I said before, the original GSL had this dialogue. It was very much in place, and they wanted people to be aware that they could pull your license. Now, that being said, we signed on to the GSL because we weren't afraid of them doing that. And to my knowledge, they never exercised that. Not saying that people are saying, well, nobody signed on to the GSL. No, there were a bunch of people that signed on to the GSL, but to my knowledge, they never exercised it. Not only that, but some people were claiming that if you publish for the GSL, you couldn't publish any more 3.5 content. If that was in there, they never enforced that because I was producing content. I literally produced Amethyst for 5 different systems. So if they're saying I couldn't publish for other systems or old content, they certainly didn't exercise that right. So looking at this again, and I'm just kind of letting people know that I'm doing this. It kind of constitutes, like, the thing is that I understand they want to be inclusive. That's good. That's true. That they should be doing that. What they should be careful about is whether or not they are okay with allegory. And what I mean by that is, can we create a situation where we are making a rule set? Like, here's the thing: most people say D&D and role-playing games aren't art, and we've talked about this at length. And I've talked with this about Paco, and he says stuff like, no, games can be considered art, but if games are going to be considered artwork, they have to have the capacity to upset you, and that means. That means there can be this subtle line of, maybe we're going to say something that's going to upset you. Amethyst does. Amethyst has a lot of allegory. Now, they're not intentional, but they did kind of squeeze in. So what is that allegory? We have aspects dealing with slavery and racism. Now, that not being said, we're not promoting racism or sexism and so forth. And oddly enough, the people who have criticized Amethyst negatively have been people that have gone after the politics and saying it's a very left-leaning publication. And we know that D&D and Wizards of the Coast is trying to endorse that left-leaning ideology, which is something that I'm very much in support of. Inclusivity and getting away of that kind of content. But the question is, if we have, like Baruch Makut, a racist in a nation that endorses slavery, that is very much an allegory to the southern United States during the pre-Civil War, something to say, well, that's offensive. And my answer to that is, yes, it's supposed to be offensive. I am not celebrating these people. They are the bad guys. So that's the question, is whether or not Wizards of the Coast will say, well, that's offensive. We're cutting your license. Now, it should be noted that because the GSL wasn't signed on by as many people, I am certain, because I was reached out to by Mike Merles, that the Wizards of the Coast did actually read my content. And so they knew this content was there. And so they did not at any point make a comment or threaten to pull the license of Amethyst, even though it had that potentially inflammatory content. Going further, we also are producing a book in the future called Heavenfall, which does it doesn't try to steer away from Old Testament religious iconography. It does deal with the rapture, and it does flip the dynamic of who the bad guys are in this setting. A lot of stories, movies, games, even the video games like Doom, even the new game like Doom, they try to steer away from pushing too close to the religious allegory. And the moment you start pushing things to a religious allegory, people start getting angry, whether or not it should be taken seriously. And Heavenfall is something that could be very controversial. So I am worried that if we publish Heavenfall under 1.2, whether or not they will pull that license. So that's something that I wouldn't mind asking them, going like, will you allow us to skirt for the purposes of allegory and making a message, right? Can we present stories the way classic Star Trek did, where there are allegories of issues that are dealing with our modern society? Heavenfall is like Doom confirmed. No, because although I like your mindset, but Doom it still presents demons as the bad guys, and Heavenfall doesn't do that. So Tabletop 1.2 will only apply to tabletop RPG content, whether published books, electronic publications, or on virtual tabletops. Nobody needs to wonder if it applies to anything else. It doesn't, and since DSS Machina doesn't do anything outside of these few categories, we'll be safe in that. Deauthorizing 1.0a, this is the big thing. This is the one thing that everyone's basically saying that is inexcusable. If this clause is here, there is absolutely no compromise. Bit of a question. About the D&D core rules of Creative Commons. Can we take the core rules of 5.1 SRD and make a new role-playing game separate from the OGL 1.2? Theoretically, yeah. Everything that I think, anything they put into Creative Commons, you can technically take out and make your own game from. That's why I'm interested in how much they're putting in and whether or not they put in enough stuff that constitutes. Because they could just be references and names and so forth, and you're like, well, I still have to use the SRD. We know there's a big concern the Creative Commons license and the open terms of 1.2 are intended to help with that. One key reason why we have to deauthorize, we can't use the protective option 1.2 if someone can just publish harmful, discriminatory, or illegal content under 1.0a. Now, here's the thing. I know most people talk about 3.5. They talk about that erotic book that came out for 3.5. And a lot of people bring that up in a lot of circles. I actually saw this book and I flipped through it, but I never really gave it a lot of thought, and I can't remember the name of it. But it was a book. It was a book of erotic spells and erotic races, and there was a lot of graphic content. It didn't have artwork. It used a lot of photoshopped photos, so the quality wasn't particularly high. And as a result, there was a lot of direct nudity and sexual situations. And I know that there was a issue, and I think there was even a lawsuit that Wizards might have lost, because this book is still available. You can still pick it up in certain areas, but it's not available everywhere because a lot of places just don't want to carry it. I'm not offended by this book. It's a book about sex in D&D. But outside of that, I am trying to think of any games of any level that employed any version of the OGL to produce. Like, is there a just come out and say it, is there a right-wing Christian fundamental hateful racist 5th edition book? And if there's one out there, I certainly don't know. I do know that there are people in the industry that say stupid things. Very often it's been the pronoun issue. Like, they'll say stupid, hateful things about pronoun usage, and it's just like, why is that the hill you want to make a fight on? It's just like, it's weird that so many people are like, I believe in inclusivity, I believe this, but then you'll make an anti-trans comment, and I'm just like, why did you have to go in that direction? Hey, Paul. So that's one thing I'm curious about, whether or not they've done that. So, because I know people who are YouTube people that have said stupid things, but I don't know if any of them are game developers. I know there are board game designers that have absolutely said some stupid things, and we're seeing issues right now. And I know someone's going to say this is a direct attack on the new TSR fiasco. The issue is about the new TSR fiasco is that I don't think they're doing anything OGL related, and it's not like anyone has any respects for the new TSR or believe the new TSR is going to produce any content that anyone's going to buy anyway. So this is one of those situations where they're trying to protect themselves against something that doesn't really exist. I mean, are they tilting to windmills here? Like, I'm trying, if someone could find me the specific books that they're like, oh, we can't allow this with 5th edition, or other 5th edition books are like, well, we can't permit this under 1D&D. I would really like to know, because I don't know. I know what you're talking about. I cannot remember the name. CC is actually a set of licenses. Using content from CC depends on what specific set of licenses it's using. It's so usable information, maybe very limited in scope depending on which ones it will use. To my knowledge, it's using 4.0, I think. And if they're using 4.0, I do believe that's the one a lot of other people are using for their open gaming systems, and it's the one I elected to use as well. So it's going to be very, very interesting. Pardon me. Get that out of the way. Only 2 sections can be changed once OGL 1.2 is live: how you cite Wizards in your work and how we can contact each other. Now, I'm a little curious about how we cite Wizards. Specifically the brand Wizards or the content from Wizards. So they need to explain that. We will communicate with each other, so we thought these 2 sections needed to be future-proofed. Yes, obviously, when we get telepathy, they're going to have to cover that. Okay, so for completeness, let's sum up what else is in the OGL for support documents. Virtual tabletop policy will continue to support VTT usage for both OGL creators and VTT operators. This is something that Roll20 is going to have to worry about. By the way, if I'm talking too fast, tell me, but I am trying to run this as a stream of consciousness. Ownership disputes, you own your own content. A lot of people thought the GSL had this phrase about owning content, and when I looked at it, it was a better worded version of what the 1.0A, sorry, the 2.0 had, and I didn't believe that that was actually there. So ownership disputes, no hateful content. We know that. Content creator badge, you have the option to include a badge on your OGL. Now, we'll talk about that in a second. That was one of the biggest things about the 4th edition that was appealing to me. Overall, what you're going for here is good faith creators of the same level of freedom to create tabletop RPG content that's been so great for everyone, while giving us the tools to ensure the game continues to become ever more inclusive and welcoming. Blah 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 blah. We're very interested in read your thoughts. Blah blah blah. Let's flip over to this thing right now, and we have the draft. I'm going to skip over certain things because if you want a really super detailed one-on-one, then we can probably find that elsewhere. The core D&D mechanics, which are located 56 through 104, 254 to 260 of this system reference document 5.1, but not the examples used in those pages. So we can't use the examples, but we can use the entries. I don't believe system reference document 5.1, is that out? Is it 5 or is it 5.1? I got to check. I imagine that this is going to get updated, or it's referencing a document that doesn't yet exist. And like I said, here it is, Creative Commons Attribute 4.0 International, CC by 4.0. That is the same one that I know. I'm trying to remember the name of the company. There is a company, I can't remember his name. He's been trying to get me to help him with his own D20 OGL system. He's using the 4.0. And I do believe I grabbed and I'm using the 4.0 international license as well. Our copyright rights in the other content included in the system reference document are licensed to you under the Open Gaming License 1.2. Now, it should be noted these are blue, but these all link just to wizards.com. Let's see here. Paul. Hey, Paul. CCBY4 is limiting to leveling, multiclassing, alignment, languages, inspiration, backgrounds. One provided. Equipment, non-magical items includes lifestyles, expenses, info as well. Feats, one provided. Ultimately, so this is one thing where I'm basically in the clear, because although I may mention rules, I mention strength, dexterity, I mention advantage. In my books, I don't copy paste stuff from the SRD. I do believe the only exception, and I do believe this is the only exception, is that I do copy paste the burst fire rules for modern and futuristic weapons from the DMG. And even then, I could probably reword that pretty fast. So I don't use a lot of stuff. Using ability scores, time, movement, the environment, resting between adventures, combat rules, multiple subcategories like actions in combat, order in combat, how spellcasting works, how monster stat blocks work, and conditions. So basically, it's the core mechanics of the system, which some people say they don't need to put in anyway because you can't copyright mechanics. There's a lot of legal stuff on here. There's a lot of lawyers that'll say they can, they can't, and there's a lot of fuzzy territory there. But to be honest, there are lawyers out there to talk about that. I'm sure you'll find that video. Use of D&D content in virtual tabletops is allowed under terms of Wizards. I'm sure once Roll20 reads this, they will probably let people know whether or not they're concerned by it. We'll get to that as well. Platforms such as D&D Beyond and DM's Guild provide additional paths to share D&D content. Last time I checked, and maybe something can be, because this is to give you an idea, I don't go to D&D Beyond that much. But last time I checked, D&D Beyond didn't have a storefront where you could buy third-party books. And that's going to be really interesting. Because they have a store, but the store is entirely WotC-produced content, is it not? Because this is going to be one of the biggest things, and I said this in I think in a video. Yeah, I don't see anything that's Wizards of the Coast. If they allow 1.2 content to be sold on D&D Beyond as a PDF, boys, it is going to be so hard not to do that. Last time I checked, D&D Beyond was down. Oh, it's up now because I can literally see it right now. I can see it right there. So it is up. I'm sure. Everything happens. A lot of these sites kind of go crazy, but adventures. Let's see here. The adventures all look like first-party stuff as well. So I'll tell you right on. A lot of people are like, abandon this, abandon that. Can confirm WotC only. Yeah, but this is the thing here. Use if they say platforms D&D Beyond can provide additional paths to share your D&D content, that implies that potentially I can sell a 1.2 compliant Ultramodern 5 on D&D Beyond. And if that's true, and this policy is like this, I'm on it. I'll tell you right now, to be able to sell my PDFs on a platform as big as D&D Beyond, I don't care how many people have been unsubscribing. And I'm not saying, oh, I'm turning trader. I'm just saying the fact that as a businessman, I would be foolish to not do that. I mean, I still pretty good on Drive-Thru RPG. If I could be, if I could be an early adopter onto 1.2 and get my content on that platform, I would do it as soon as humanly possible. I'd love Ultramodern 5 and Amethyst to be some of the first products to pop up on a D&D Beyond storefront. So me being 100% honest with you guys. Creator badges. Now this is funny. This is something funny. So there have been 3 creator badges out there. There was a D20 SRD badge. And it was a little thing. It was about yay big, and they removed that. That one's no longer authorized. Hey Fred, how you doing? Glad you showed up. So, and we are looking at the 4th edition. GSL had a wonderful one. I wish I had that darn book, but the 4th edition GSL had this beautiful block, is like this big, and it said, "This book is compatible with the 4th edition of Dungeons and Dragons." It said the whole word. It was beautiful. I loved having that. You had to have it on the back cover, but that was worth the price of admission right then and there. So what these are, this is equivalent to the original. They're not putting an edition there, which D20 Modern and the 4th edition GSL had, but we're looking at something that gives you the ampersand, doesn't say D&D, and that's very specific. Are these good? They're not bad. I mean, I don't think they're going to be one of those things that people are going to look at and go, "Ooh, I know what that means." Like the 4th edition one said Dungeons and Dragons. So if they improve this, I say this is not bad, but if they can make one that actually says Dungeons and Dragons, or actually has the D&D, not just the ampersand, that would be a huge win. I would definitely like using these anyway. Most likely, once again, they'll say you have to use it on the back end. I'd be interested whether or not they say you can't use a unauthorized 5e logo like the ones that other people like we use, because I would put the 5e logo on the front and then have this on the back, for example. This is the one that everyone hates. Open Gaming License is no longer an authorized license. This means that you may not use that version OGL for any prior version to publish SRD. Effective date is bolded and empty because they have not established what that date's going to be. The rumors it's going to be the summer. That's going to be annoying for me because I have 2 Amethyst books that are being published under 1.0a, and that means Revelations would have to be published under 1.2 unless something happens and I'm still allowed to use the 1.0a license. Currently, I have no problem. I'm still doing the layout for factions, and we're also still looking at sending the print edition for the print on demand and the print edition for Amethyst Quintessence. It takes 4 seconds for me to copy paste the 1.2 license in there if I want to be compliant in that regard. So I can do that pretty quickly. And I've been planning, hopefully, on rebuilding Ultramodern 5 using InDesign and having a slightly more refined file. And that can be re-released using 1.2. I could release a version of Ultramodern just for D&D Beyond that's 1.2 compliant and still have everything still kind of solid. It does not mean that any content previously published under that version needs to meet or update this license. Any previously published content remains licensed under whichever version of the OGL was in effect when you publish that content. Now, this is for a lot of people are saying this is the end thing. No matter how good the 1.2 OGL is, as long as that's in there, it's a non-fight. I can see your point, but I'm also at a point that if the 1.2 is a good document, then I'm willing to move forward. Hey, Square Peg, I'm curious about their VTT policy because I'm building a virtual reality-based VTT for a social VR platform. I want to know more about that. That sounds really cool. I'm building a virtual reality-based VTT for a social VR program. Now, there is a board game, I can't remember, that's entirely in VR. You can get on Oculus Quest. A friend of mine keeps on telling me to buy it, but I can't remember the name of it. That being said, I'm surprised that there isn't other than using social media, like using one of the VR chats, you'd be surprised why there wouldn't be a VR-based D&D VTT by now. And if somebody makes one, sign me up. Almost all my friends have VR. That would be so friggin' cool. That might convince me to actually use VTTs because I generally don't. But we'll get to that. Open Gaming License. Like I said, this document is only 6 pages. This is a license between us and you. Our license content, this good content under SRD 5.1 or any subsequent version of the SRD re-release under this license. That's good. Our only licensed content is licensed under this license. Any other content we release or have released is not licensed to you under this license, so we couldn't use other books they publish. That's fine. They ripped me off more than I ripped them off anyway. Wink. This is your creative contributions to your works that are not our licensed content or our unlicensed content. This license permits you to combine your content with our licensed content and distribute the resulting works as authorized by this license. Works covered. This license only applies to printed media and static electronic files such as EPUBs or PDFs you create for use in your tabletop role-playing games and supplements and in virtual tabletops in accordance with our virtual tabletop policy, which we will get to. Thank you. It's Demio. You're 100% right. It was Demio. And I should probably try that game. I heard it's really fun. Your licensed work, to be licensed work, it must be covered work as defined by Section 1B, which we just did. Contain both our licensed content and your content, and not contain our unlicensed content. Makes sense, and so forth. And it's also weird, they mentioned specifically stuff like owl bears and mind flayers, which you couldn't use before, which I thought was interesting. If they're saying you can now use owl bears, that would be, not that I ever would, but we are only licensing you our copyrights in our licensed content, except that under Section 5A, which is down there. We also grant you a trademark license to the Creator Product Badge as further detailed in the Creator Product Badge Style Guide. You receive no other rights to our trademark and no rights to any other intellectual property we own. That all makes sense. Their provision that prohibits any animations in VTT is kind of irritating. I get they're trying to prevent video games from popping up, but that needs to be better defined. Yeah, so it could potentially hit up and have issues with video games that they'll have to contact Wizards specifically and work a situation out. And the same goes for cartoons, movies, and so forth, because they don't want anyone else making movies, right? Check out Arcana as an AR VTT that can be used on your phone tablet. Yeah, but I thought the idea of actually putting on an Oculus Quest is kind of neat. I'm not going to lie. The only issue is that if you had an Oculus Quest, the average game session lasts like 4 hours. Your Quest would be dead after 90 minutes. So that's another issue, but we will get into that. License. In consideration for your compliance for this license, you may copy, use, modify, or distribute our licensed content around the world as part of your licensed work. This license is perpetual, meaning that it has no set limit. Non-exclusive, meaning that we may offer other licenses to our licensed content or our unlicensed content under conditions we choose. And irrevocable, meaning that content license under this license can never be withdrawn from the license. It also cannot be modified except for the attribute provisions of Section 5 and Section 9 regarding notices. So they're trying to make this one the permanent one. And obviously, if something happens down the road and Hasbro's like, no, we need to copyright all of this. We need to stop anyone from making anything that's non D&D. This license potentially says, well, now you no longer can do that. Your licensed works are yours. They may not be copied or used without your permission. You acknowledge that we and our licensees, as content creators ourselves, might independently come up with content similar to something you create. If you have a claim that we breached this provision or that one of our licenses did in connection with content they licensed from us, and that leads into going into here. Any such claim will be brought only as a lawsuit for breach of contract and only for money damages. You expressly agree that money damages are an adequate remedy for such a breach and that you will not seek or are entitled an injunctive relief. Basically what that's saying, well, that's good to see, yeah. So basically what that's saying here is if we take something of yours and you can file a lawsuit, we'll give you money to shut up, but you can't stop us from publishing it. So so this is one of those situations. So now this is interesting. So let's say I publish Amethyst, which is one of my favorite IPs, or even Affinity, which is the newest one, and I publish it under 1.2. They publish a setting that's almost identical. Or you can even say that is word for word almost identical. And I say, well, you literally stole my property. Well, according to this 1.2, all you can do is get a check from us. You can't stop us from still publishing that book. That's an interesting thing. Now, that not being said, if you take them to court for money, you can, if, for example, they copy-pasted your book entirely, you can run them away with millions of dollars because that is so blatant that it is absolutely a violation. But the point is still you cannot stop them from publishing. basically they will just give you money. Now, I'm not sort of saying that whatever money we give you have to accept. Any such lawsuit, you must show that we knowingly and intentionally copied your licensed work. Excess and substantial similarity will not be enough to prove a breach of this Section 3. That's a very fuzzy thing. You're saying, if it's vague, it's vague, you can't do it. Problem is that it's not up to them to decide. It's up to the courts to decide. So if you file a lawsuit against them for monetary compensation, they can't say, well, according to this, it's not similar enough, but that's not their responsibility. That's the courts. And that's not me as a lawyer. That's just common sense. What we own our licensed content and resolve all rights not expressly granted in this license. You control your content. This is kind of almost repeating ourselves. You can make your content available under any terms you choose, but you may not change the terms under which we make our licensed content available. Makes sense. On the content of 1.0, what happens to the 3.5 and before content? Well, theoretically, that's a good question. Once again, because I don't publish pre 3.5 content, it's not something I've been looking into, but other people that do, once again, they may be looking at using an agnostic OGL to protect them if they're still producing 3.0 content or earlier. How does this affect old school revival content? Are you referring to stuff like Dungeon Crawl Classics or something specific? I'm pretty sure they're safe. You may permit the use of your content on any terms you want. However, any license you offer is different from the terms of this license, blah, blah, blah. Okay, warranties and disclaimers. You're over the age of majority, if younger, blah, blah, blah. It's easy enough. Authority of the part, authority to, so you own the company. No infringement, so you're not infringing on somebody else's work. Except otherwise, no endorsement. You will not state, suggest, or imply that your licensed works are endorsed or associated with us. That's common. No illegal conduct. You will not violate the law in any way or license your licensed work. No hateful. This is according to them, this is the only really big reason that they're doing this. You will not include content in your licensed work that is harmful, discriminatory, illegal, obscene, or harassing, or engage in conduct that is harmful, discriminatory, illegal, obscene, or harassing. We have the sole right to decide what conduct or content is hateful, and you covenant that you... I'm a writer, and even I got tripped up by that language. And you covenant that you will not contest any such determination via any suit or other legal action. So that says if we take it away by saying that it's offensive, by signing on to this agreement, you legally cannot sue them. Whether or not this contract can actually hold up in a court saying that, no, you absolutely can, just because the contract says you can't doesn't necessarily mean you can't. Talking about content from some publishers that are no longer around or active. Well, once again, grandfathered clause indicates that anything published already is safe. It's basically, it's the issue whether or not you want to publish a third edition product in 2024. That's basically what I think the big question is. Modification and termination. We may only modify the provisions of this license identifying the attribution required under Section 5 and the notice provision under Section 9A. We may not modify any other provision. We'll get to 9. We may immediately terminate your license if you infringe on any of our intellectual property, bring an action challenging our ownership of our licensed content, trademarks, or patents. Basically, if you push us, we'll just... Covenant is a very old school writing, goes back to Bible terms. This reminds me, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's a place marker because, or a little wink, because people who read the original 1.0a, there is. Do I have a reference to that? There is a word in the. There's a word in the 1.0a. I actually only have the version 1 in my. Oh, there it is, 1.0a. There's a word in here that's very weird. It's a very old word. And some people said they put that in there just as a joke. It's still a valid word, but it's like, why in the world would they? Because I understand, like, we have a covenant. I understand the terminology, we have a covenant. But the way they used it there, that you covenant, that you will, that's like, using it as an adjective or a verb is just very confusing. And so you may terminate license if you breach any other terms of this license and you do not cure that breach within 30 days of notice to you of the breach. So you have 30 days to basically cancel things. Disclaimer of warranties, limitations, liability. You understand and agree that we are providing a licensed content as is and make no representation or warranty of any kind concerning your use of the licensed content except as expressed stated in this license. We disclaim all warranties, express, implied, statutory, otherwise. You bear all risk of using the licensed content. There's a lot of legalese here. And we get into the miscellaneous. Some people have stated they have issues with Section 9. So let's see what the big deal is. We may notify you by email or physical address. We can locate for you only if we cannot locate your email or physical address after a reasonable search. Notice via a public channel is sufficient. Daggers, stop fighting. And so basically, if they can't reach out to you, then them making a public... Boys, come on. Them making a public statement is the same as them reaching out to you. This license governs your use of the open license content. This license consists only of terms expressly included herein and not any matter not expressly included herein. In accepting this license, you represent and warrant to us that you have relied only on the terms of this license and the advice of your own counsel. If any, you have not relied on anything that is not expressly part of this license. No waiver of rights. If we fail to exercise any right we have in this license, I feel you would not prevent us from exercising that right in the future. That's a big one. That's basically them saying if just because we don't go after you now doesn't mean we won't go after you later. Severability. If any part of this license is held to be unenforceable or invalid for any reasons, Wizards may declare the entire license void as between it and the party that obtained the ruling or in its entirety. Unless Wizards elects to do so, the balance of this license will be enforced as if that part which is unenforceable or invalid did not exist. That almost implies the fact that even though it's unrevocable, if a court declares it invalid, it can just be revoked. I don't know if that's weird. Governing law, jurisdiction, class action waiver. This license and all matters relating to its interpretation and enforcement will be governed by the laws of the state of Washington. This was something that was very interesting because I do recall that some people were commenting that the 1.0A was so vague, it didn't specifically mention which laws applied to it. And here they're saying very specifically the Court of Washington, which is where WotC's headquarters is, which makes sense. And any disputes arising out of or relating to this license will be resolved solely and exclusively through individual litigation in a state or federal courts located in the country in which Wizards or any successor has its headquarters, which right now is the United States. And the parties expressly consent to the jurisdiction of such courts. Each party hereto irrevocably waives the right to participate. Okay. Each party hereto irrevocably waives the right to participate in any class, collective, or joint action with respect with such a dispute. This is basically saying that, if I understand correctly, although if we screw up and we take something that you own and you can prove it, we'll give you money. However, you are not allowed to join a class action lawsuit against us. And I do believe that this is basically them saying that if there is a lawsuit, if a group of people get together and say, we're all going to file a class action lawsuit in order to prevent the 1.0A from being revoked. The no waiver of rights is a standard contract clause, but a lot of people are freaking out about it. I get their fears, but this is standard and generally a non-issue. That's a good point. Thank you, Paul. The no waiver of rights, that's up here. We felt, yeah. No, so I know, like I said, I wasn't saying that this was a bad idea. I'm saying that this makes perfect sense. Like most of these things, when I mention them and I try to explain what it means in kind of layman terms, it doesn't mean at all that I object to them. It all makes perfect sense. But this one basically, I mean, this is once again, is probably a very common term used, but it's basically saying that if something happens and there is a class action lawsuit towards Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro in order to prevent them from revoking the 1.0A, if you're signed on to 1.2, you cannot join that. Headings and footnotes. The headings and footnotes contained in this license are for reference purposes and shall not be used. That makes sense. Waiver of jury trial. You each waive any right to a jury trial of any dispute, claim, or clause of action relating or arising out of this license. Which means, if I remember correctly, that basically court cases in the States can either be entirely done by a judge or done by a jury. And in case you're wondering, whenever corporations go have a lawsuit against them, if it goes to a jury, they lose. Whenever you let people, average people, in a lawsuit against a company or a corporation, they very seldom win. It's when a judge adjudicates the whole thing. That's when a corporation might come out on top because he looks at the letter of the law. Juries very, very, very often favor individuals, small businesses, people who are being affected by a corporation, and they generally favor people. Also, if there's a contract, the person who signed the contract is generally more favored than the person who wrote the contract. And this is one of the reasons why they're stating this. The headings and footnotes contained in this license are for reference purposes. Waiver of a jury trial. Review by counsel. You should seek advice of counsel to make sure you understand this license. That's more of a suggestion than anything else. So this is only the last page. This is the virtual tabletop policy. So let's look at this one. Even though it doesn't really apply to me, it's going to be interesting to see. Why does Wizard need a VTT policy? We support the role of VTT's play in the tabletop space because, of course, this doesn't exist in 2000 and didn't exist in 2008 with the GSL. I'm almost like, God, are you? What is? I don't. They've never been this loud before. Is it my voice that's doing it? What are you doing? Like, why are you so irritable right now? Okay, we support the role VTTs play in the tabletop space. The ability to play remotely means more people can play the game, and it's wonderful that people thousands of miles apart can share a space as though sitting around a table. But as VTTs advance, their functionality will raise tricky questions. Where is the line between VTT and a video game? When does a VTT become more than just a replacement for a traditional tabletop? Those questions require thoughtful answers. Answering them will take time, and we want this policy to reflect your input, so we will be asking feedback and talking to you about our goals as that discussion advances and new technology emerges. I think when it comes down to it, if someone were to ask me what's the difference between a VTT and a video game, is the fact that you need a human being to run the game. Video games have just players interacting with a system, but a virtual tabletop is a means of which one or more game masters run a game for one or more players. That's basically the situation. I think the moment you create a situation where the DM or GM is not present and the game or dungeon runs itself, that is when it starts becoming a video game, because that's what a video game is. That's what a cooperative video game is players playing against a system. So the inclusion and the existence of a dungeon master or games master is basically, in my opinion, the biggest difference between a VTT and a video game. So, using VTTs to replicate the experience of sitting around a table playing D&D with your friends. So, displaying static SRD content is just fine because it's just like looking at a source book. You can put the text of Magic Missile in your VTT and use it to calculate and apply damage. This is a lot vaguer, by the way. This is like this. You notice the legalese is just missing from this. I have no idea why they're making so much noise. To replace manually rolling dice and calculating is also fun. The VTT can apply Magic Missile's 1 die 4 plus 1 damage automatically to your target's hit points. You do not have to manually calculate and track the damage. Here it is. What isn't permitted are features that don't replicate your dining room table storytelling. If you replace your imagination with an animation of the Magic Missile streaking across the board to strike your target, or your VTT integrates our content into an NFT, that's not the tabletop experience. That's more like a video game. So this is based. Now, I hate NFTs and cryptocurrency and blockchains, so I could care less about them, whether or not they're doing this so only they can make NFTs and nobody else. I do not care. I don't like the NFTs. I don't like blockchain, so I do not care whether or not they're trying to cut people off from using them. But this one, the animation Magic Missile streaking across the board, I mean, we know for a fact that once D&D Beyond or once WotC creates their virtual tabletop, we know it's going to create this wonderful 3D illusion of a table. I have never seen them fight like this before. Hey! I can rattle the board like this in order to get their attention. What is wrong with you people? What is wrong? You guys need to calm down. What? I know, I'm talking to Degus. No, they have the IQ of 4. It's not, or actually, technically, they have the intelligence of 1 or 3. But I don't know why they're acting up so much. Okay, I do apologize. we know perfectly well that this virtual tabletop that they are creating is probably going to have animation. It's probably going to have, because I guarantee you that the virtual tabletop that Wizards is going to make is going to have animation of a magic missile streaking across the board to strike your target. We know that's going to happen. So what they're saying is that you can do everything you want except for what we're going to do. We reserve the right to make our virtual tabletop look like a video game, to involve NFTs. We're just saying that you can't. So Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, D20 Pro, and Foundry can look the way they look now, but what they can't do is upgrade themselves to compete with what Wizards is going to be creating down the road. We don't know where they're going. We've seen the preview on 1D&D, so we do know that they are going to be creating a wonderfully spiffy system. They're creating this system where it looks like all the minis are to scale. There's a 3-dimensional. They're definitely going to make it look really nice. And so we know for a fact there's going to be animation. There's going to be visual effects. And what they're saying is that they own the rights to those visual effects. Idle thoughts, since I'm not a legal expert, but for the class action waiver clause, if someone content creator has made something under OGL 1.2 and wants to start a class action suit, this license is the only thing that prevents them, and it can be terminated. So if their license is terminated, would it be enforceable, or they be able to pursue a suit? That's interesting. That means the only thing technically that Wizards can do is cancel their license. So if they are filing, because obviously if you're filing a lawsuit against Wizards of the Coast, you should expect them to say we're canceling your license. At that point you're basically waging war against somebody you have a contract with. They're going to revoke your license. That's going to happen. So that's an interesting point. Like they're saying, like, well, we're canceling your license. You have to destroy this product. You can't make any more product. You can pursue your lawsuit, but until that happens, you can't produce any content under the license. So anyway, that's going what I'm saying here about the whole animation Magic Missile. I guarantee you this is what they're going to be doing with there. And they're basically saying you can't make your VTT look like what our VTT is going to look like. Hey, may I make my VTT Owlbear token look like the one from the Monster Manual? No. We've never licensed visual depictions of our content under OGL, just the text of the SRD. That hasn't changed. You can create a creature called an owlbear with a stat block from the SRD. You cannot copy any of our owlbear depictions. That's standard. That's just illustrations. That was probably in there from the first place. So they're basically saying you can't use the image of the owlbear. You can use someone else's image of an owlbear. And once again, that's not going to affect us. We have never used. We don't even use their monsters in my book. So using their illustrations was never a possibility. What about OGL 1.08? Does this policy apply to that? Yes, you can upload your already licensed content to a VTT. So anyone who's produced content that's not 1.2 can still put out their content. So I'm still valid in producing ultra-modern content and Amethyst for the virtual tabletops that we're actually working on right now. I own or operate VTT. How does this affect me? If you are a VTT owner or operator who supports OGL products on your platform, you have the same obligations for VTT content than any other website owner or operator has for copyrighted content under the DMCA. So basically, that's them saying the fact that, well, I think at this point, I don't know whether or not Roll20 is using copyrighted images from Wizards of the Coast unless without permission. If they're doing that's on them. You say this is a conversation. Does this mean this policy can change? Yes, we need your feedback as the tabletop space evolves. The potential of VTTs is tremendous and exciting, and we don't want to harm their development. Okay, so this is not legalese. Like this is a draft for discussion purposes. Like this has all this really fancy legalese, and then this changes the dialogue completely. At this point, the legalese stops, and it's them talking about what this policy is going to probably look like. The only thing that prevents them, and it can be terminated, so a license can be terminated, would be enforceable. Okay. Endless Nights. Telling people that they can't make animation is kind of odd because you're not taking their animation, you're making your move, or VTT is making their own. I don't see how that would ever be enforced. They have their own agreement with WotC, so it's a non-issue. There you go. Thank you, Paul. So basically, but I think the point is still standing. I think it's still implying that that we want to make sure that our virtual tabletop is so much better than everybody else's. So, you know, if Roll20, probably where Roll20 is right now, where Foundry is right now, that's probably never going to change. But once word gets out and we start seeing video and examples of what the D&D internal official VTT looks like, it's going to create a huge amount of competition. And yes, the Wizard VTT will probably not involve any homebrew content. So if you want to run those official modules, you can run through the VTT. If you want to run homebrew or the third-party stuff, you can go through Foundry or Roll20. But the moment they start showing you this, actual minis popping around the dungeon in a three-dimensional environment, and they cast a spell or a sword weaves, and then the miniature waves a sword, and the spellcaster casts a spell. That's something that's going to be so amazing to look at, and they're basically saying, we're telling these VTTs that they can't do that. You can do everything up to that. You can do what you're doing now, but the really good VTT, we're keeping that for ourselves. So that's basically where we're at. So how does this affect Deus Ex Machina? Looking like it's not affecting me at all. Will I adhere to the 1.2? Once I'm pretty certain that they're not going to find stuff like Heavenfall offensive, I will. And once again, if it's a situation where I can sell my products on D&D Beyond, yeah, I'm going to jump on that. So is this progress? Yes. Am I annoyed about the 1.0 being deauthorized? Yes. Does it really affect me ultimately? No. So I know some people still say the fight is going on, but for me, this is a pretty good victory for us. So I think if you could disagree, absolutely make comments and speak to that regard. But people who are still fighting this, I think you have to ask your question at this point. You have to ask yourself, why am I fighting? Am I fighting on a moral level, an ethical level, because the 1.0A should not be revocable? Or are you doing it because it affects you personally because of a product you're producing? And if that's true, how is it doing that? Like, how is your publication at risk if the 1.0A is deauthorized? Because if it's not offensive, then you should be okay. So that's the question I'm asking. For those people who hate this license, this 1.2 license, why? And how does it and why does it hurt you specifically? If you're someone who wants to produce racist and bigoted content, you're not going to have my sympathy. If it's because you're worried that they will retract something, well, according to this, they can't do that. So I'm looking at this and I'm not seeing a huge problem. So I think the only people that are going to be hating on this now are people that hate the idea of the 1.0 being deauthorized on a pure ethical level. The other group of people that are going to go to war with this still are going to be people that simply say they want to bring WotC down. Hasbro's a company, they hate D&D, they hate Wizards of the Coast, and they're using this ammunition in order to take them down. So I think it's really important now more than ever to stay skeptical. When someone is telling you why this is a horrible idea, I think you should ask questions and why this is a horrible idea. I think people are fighting this on principle by this point. This is a massive win and a step in the right direction, though it could obviously use some tweaks. 99% of the content creators are safe. Yes, Paul, that's exactly my point. Thank you. You're hitting the nail right. You're hitting the nail on the head. That this is going to help. This is going to alleviate 99% of the people that are complaining. I think once this gets official, and if it stays this language stays the same right now, everyone should be okay. So people that are still running the fight, in my opinion, at that point, are people that just want to take WotC down. They're hitting it for ethical levels, and that might be a little wishy-washy if you're just fighting it on an ethical level. Or, and I'm saying this very specifically, you're trying to take WotC down in order to push your own agenda of pushing another publisher. If you're a publisher or you're a lover of Pathfinder and you want someone to buy Pathfinder books, your Pathfinder books, that's going to be more obvious. I think if you're still on the hate train after this week, I'm going to look at it and go, okay, do you have a motivation other than altruism? Let's see here. I contract in the VTT space and have done animations and 3D assets, so it's kind of a deal breaker if they tell me I cannot do that. I think, once again, they will probably make it very specific once you see more of their platform coming out. I contract in the VTT space, and I've done animations and 3D assets, so it's kind of a deal breaker if they tell me I cannot do that. I have a funny feeling you're probably going to be okay. So what VTT? Yeah, that's one thing that needs to be changed. Limiting animation is kind of ridiculous, but I feel that it's something that will be changed with feedback. Foundry modules, yeah. I had no idea Foundry had animation. Like I said, I don't play virtual tabletops. And I also did not know that Foundry supported 3D. That's cool. I mean, we are producing content for it now. We're doing Roll20 first, and then we're going to be doing Foundry. Oh, you're not going to see any animations on our end, because the guy I have doing it is not that. He's talented. He's a Microsoft engineer, but he's not that talented. And I'm not asking him to create animation. So once again, I think we're okay. I can see that How to RPG is going live as well. So I am going to step off and let How to RPG have his space, because I love Fred. I'm going to switch over to his stream and see what he thinks. So everyone who's watching, the few people that are, hop on over to How to RPG, or which used to be How to DVD, and let's watch his stream. So that's going to be it for Deus Ex Machina. Thanks, guys, and I will have more